The objective of this presentation is to understand the mechanism of normal labor. Before we start understanding mechanism of labor, we need to know some terminologies. Lie. Lie is the relationship of the long axis of the fetus to the long axis of the centralized uterus or maternal spine. Longitudinal lie is the most common lie in 99.5% of the cases. Transverse or oblique lie is present in 0.5% of the cases. Presentation. Presentation is part of the fetus that occupies the lower pole of the uterus. Accordingly, it can be cephalic presentation as in 96.5%, pedalic as in 3%, shoulder or other presentations as in 0.5% of the cases. Here, the white line represents maternal spine and the red line represents fetal long axis. The dot represents the head. When maternal spine and fetal axis are parallel to each other, it is longitudinal lie, and as the head is down, it is cephalic presentation. Here also, both the lines are parallel to each other, but the head is up, hence it is longitudinal lie but pedalic presentation. When the lines are perpendicular to each other, it is transverse lie and the presentation is shoulder. When the lines are oblique to each other, it's an oblique lie but cephalic presentation. Cephalic presentation, breech presentation, and shoulder presentation. Presenting part. Presenting part is that part of the presentation which overlies the internal os. In cephalic presentation, we have vertex in 99.5% of the cases. Vertex is an area bound anteriorly by anterior fontanelle, posteriorly by posterior fontanelle, and on the sides by parietal eminences. Brow is an area which is bound between glabella and the frontal eminence. Face is the area between the chin and the glabella. Together, they constitute 0.5% of the presentations. Instead of calling vertex presenting part in cephalic presentation, it is simply called vertex presentation or brow presentation or face presentation. Attitude. Attitude is the relationship of the different parts of the fetus to one another. The normal attitude is that of a universal flexion, that is, flexion at all joints, neck joints, the shoulder joints, elbow, hip, knee, and ankle joints. In head, there can be different attitudes and accordingly different presentations. When the head is fully flexed, it is vertex presentation. When the head is deflexed, which eventually flex fully, it is still a vertex presentation. An extended head makes it brow presentation, whereas a fully extended head, face will be the presentation. In breech, when there is universal flexion, it's called flexed breech. An extended breech or a frank breech is one where there is flexion at the hip and extension at the knee joints. Kneeling presentation is where there is extension at the hip but flexion at the knee joints. Footling presentation is where there is extension both at hip and knee joints. Here is a fully flexed head with vertex presentation. It's a deflexed head, but still a vertex presentation. An extended head makes it broad presentation, whereas a fully extended head makes it face presentation. In breech, here is a fully flexed breech, universal flexion, an extended breech where there is flexion at the hip but extension at the knees. And footling presentation, there is extension both at hips and knee joints. Attitudes, one more time, fully flexed vertex, deflexed vertex, extended brow, and fully extended face presentation. Denominator. Denominator is an arbitrary bony fixed central point on the presenting part. In vertex, it is occiput. In brow, it is frontal eminence. In face, it is mentum or chin. And in breech, it is sacrum. Position. Position is the relationship of the denominator to the different quadrants of the pelvis. Accordingly, there are 4 positions in each presentation: left occipito-anterior LOA, left occipito-posterior LOP, right occipito-anterior ROA, and right occipito-posterior ROP. In face, there can be left mento-anterior, left mento-posterior, right mento-anterior, or right mento-posterior. In breech, it is left sacro-anterior, left sacro-posterior, right sacro-anterior, or right sacro-posterior. What is shown here is a left occipito-anterior. The red line represents sagittal suture and the dot represents occiput. Now it is left occipito-posterior, right occipito-posterior, right occipito-anterior. In pictures, on the left is left occipito-anterior, on the right is left occipito-posterior, right occipito-anterior, and right occipito-posterior. Now let's look at the mechanism of labor. Mechanism of labor is defined as the series of changes in position and attitude that the presenting part has to make during its passage through the pelvis and pelvic floor during the course of labor. We need to understand that the birth canal is not a straight canal. It has a J-shaped curve. Moreover, at the inlet, the transverse diameter is more than the anteroposterior diameter, whereas at the outlet, the anteroposterior diameter is more than the transverse diameter, because of which the presenting part has to twist and turn as it descends down the birth canal. These series of movements are called together mechanism of labor. The first step in mechanism of labor is engagement. Engagement is defined when the maximum transverse diameter, that is biparietal diameter, which is 9.5 centimeters, crosses the pelvic brim. The definition of engagement does not change with the presentation, whether it is vertex or face presentation. It should not be confused with the sagittal engaging diameter. The sagittal engaging diameter is the diameter which comes into contact with the pelvic girdle in different presentations. For example, in vertex presentation, it is suboccipitobregmatic diameter, and in face presentation, it it is submentopragmatic diameter, both of which are 9.5 centimeters. They come in contact with the pelvic girdle. In bro presentation, it is mentovertical, which is 13 or 13.5 centimeters, which is coming in contact with the girdle.
What we understood in the previous slide is theoretical definition of engagement. But how to confirm the engagement clinically? For that, we need to understand a little bit of mathematics. The yellow line represents brim, the green line represents ischial spine. When the biparietal diameter, that is depicted in red dot, crosses the pelvic brim, the green dot which depicts vertex is touching the ischial spine. That is because the distance between brim and ischial spine is 5 centimeters, and incidentally the distance between biparietal diameter and vertex is also 5 centimeters. So clinically we can easily say in vertex presentation, when the vertex is palpated at ischial spine, the biparietal diameter has crossed the pelvic brim and hence engaged. However, this is not true in case of face presentation, even though the theoretical definition of engagement in face presentation remains the same. That is, when the biparietal diameter crosses the pelvic brim, the head is engaged in face presentation. But the face is not at the ischial spine, it is much below. Why is that? Again, we need to understand the mathematics here. The distance between the face and the biparietal diameter is 7 centimeters and not 5 centimeters. Hence, when the biparietal diameter crosses the pelvic brim, the face is 7 centimeters below the brim, in other words, 2 centimeters below the ischial spine. So, when you palpate the face at ischial spine, the head is not yet engaged. However, when the head is engaged, the face is in fact 2 centimeters below ischial spine, or we can say +2 station.
Before we go further, we need to understand the asynclitism. As mentioned earlier, at inlet, the transverse diameter is more than the anteroposterior diameter. That's why the head always descends into the pelvis transversely. But the sagittal suture need not be always at the midpoint between the symphysis pubis and sacral promontory. It may be either more towards the symphysis pubis, like this, or it may be deflected more posteriorly towards the sacrum, like this. This deflection of the sagittal suture, either anteriorly or posteriorly, is called asynclitism. This happens in order to negotiate the narrower anteroposterior diameter at the inlet. When the sagittal suture is exactly in the midpoint, it's called normal synclitism. When the sagittal suture is more towards symphysis pubis, it is called posterior asynclitism or Littmann's obliquity. Ear is the presenting part here. It's also called posterior parietal presentation. When the sagittal suture is more towards sacral promontory, it's the anterior parietal presentation, or called anterior asynclitism or Negle's obliquity. After engagement, the baby descends throughout the labor. Hence, it is represented in a broad downward arrow. Descent occurs throughout the mechanism of labor. The next step is flexion. To understand this, we can imagine coming out of a room whose shutters are drawn 3/4 down. Whatever we do, the baby does exactly the same. We need to bend in order to come out of the room. This bending is actually flexion. In order to understand the mechanism of flexion, we need to recall the physics that we learned in high school. When the two equal and opposite forces act, the resultant force will be diagonal. Which are the two equal and opposite forces acting in labor? The contracting and retracting uterus exerts downwards force, whereas the two levator muscles exert resistance and upward force. The resultant force will be diagonal. Hence, the head, which is flexible at the neck joint, will flex. This will help in reducing the sagittal engaging diameter from occipitofrontal, which is 10 centimeters, to suboccipitobregmatic, which is 9.5 centimeters. The two equal and opposite forces, the resultant force will be diagonal, which will help in flexion of the head at neck joint. Engagement, descent, flexion, and the next step is internal rotation. Why should internal rotation occur? As we learned earlier, at the outlet, the anteroposterior diameter is more than the transverse diameter. If the head is in a diagonal conjugate, it cannot deliver. It has to align itself into anteroposterior position, and for that, the two levator muscle act in synergy. The flexed head, as it descends, will touch one of the levator muscles. That will go into contraction, whereas the opposite levator synergetically relaxes. As a result, the head rotates by 45 degrees. The pelvic configuration also helps in this internal rotation. In the upper quadrant, there are 90 degrees, but the head has to rotate only by 45 degrees. That is 1/8 of a circle. The red line represents sagittal suture and the red dot represents occiput. The white line represents shoulder lines, anterior and posterior shoulders. The head has to rotate. The occiput has to come from this place to this place. This is called internal rotation or twisting in. What we need to understand here is the head is independent of the shoulders and it can rotate without shoulders rotating. Please note, only the head has rotated by 45 degrees, shoulders have not rotated. The next step is extension. Now that the head has rotated and the sagittal suture has aligned itself in anteroposterior diameter, the head is ready to be delivered. And this happens when the occiput hitches below the symphysis pubis, and with further forces, the head will slowly extend.
Just before extension and delivery, crowning happens. What is crowning? Crowning is nothing but when the head stretches the vulval outlet and maximum diameter of the head can be seen as though a crown can be put on the head, and at this time the head does not recede back in between contraction. contractions. After crowning, the head extends and delivers.
Extension. So we have had engagement, descent, flexion, internal rotation, delivery by extension. The next step is restitution. Once the head is delivered outside, it is free. It need not have the twist in the neck. So it this untwisting back to its original position is called restitution. Again, only the head untwists, the shoulder line does not move at all. After restitution of the head, it's time for the shoulders to deliver. Again, whatever part has to deliver should align in anterior-posterior diameter of the outlet. So now the shoulders have to rotate. The internal rotation of the shoulder corresponds to the external rotation of the head. That is because when the shoulders rotate, the head obviously rotates unless it is forcibly kept in its position. So as the anterior shoulder rotates by 45 degrees towards internally, the occiput rotates away externally, and this is called external rotation of the head. Now please watch, as the shoulders rotate, head also rotates away. That is called external rotation of the head, which corresponds to the internal rotation of the shoulders. When the head rotates externally, the baby's face directly faces the right thigh of the mother.
So to summarize the delivery of the head, first there is crowning when the maximum diameter of the head can be seen and the head won't recede back in between the contractions, followed by the delivery of the head by extension, and then untwisting of the head, that is restitution, which is followed by internal rotation of the shoulder corresponding to external rotation of the head when the face directly faces the mother's right thigh.
So to summarize the mechanism of labor: engagement, descent which occurs throughout, then the flexion of the head, followed by internal rotation, delivery by extension, untwisting of the head, that is restitution, and then the delivery of the shoulders by internal rotation of the shoulder and corresponding external rotation of the head. The head is floating, gets engaged, and then it descends. As it descends, it flexes, does internal rotation, and starts crowning, then extends and delivers the head. Then the anterior shoulder hitches below the symphysis pubis, delivery of the anterior shoulder, followed by delivery of the body by lateral flexion.
Finally, let me share the philosophy I have found in mechanism of labor while teaching it over last 37 years. We just saw that both the head and body of the baby have to perform lots of bending and twisting in order to negotiate the birth canal and get delivered. First, the head should be flexed to get the least or right engaging diameter. Similarly, in life, we need to bow to the righteousness. Then the head has to twist in. Similarly, we need to change our path away from hurdles. Next step is delivery of the head by extension. We have to stand up against the wrong and adversaries. Then comes twisting in of shoulder that corresponds to twisting out of the head. The life path is not straightforward. It has similar bends and twists as in birth canal. In order to walk out happily, we need to adopt as the path unfolds to us, like a smart baby does. Else, we may need to be delivered by forceps or vacuum, or at times by caesarean section.